Judge Oder presiding. You may be seated.
We're ready for our jury? All right, Ms. Mullins, go get the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Was everybody able to follow my instructions and admonitions over the break?
Yes, sir.
All right, Ms. Kraft, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. I apologize, Your Honor, if I can have 1 second. Okay, Doctor, I believe where we left off, we were on the second report dated March 28th from Dr. White. And he is now, instead of using the term likely, has, in this report, indicated that this is definitively an IUGR baby in stillbirth. Is there, when you look at this report, do you see any indication that there's new information that's been provided to him to change his position?
No.
One of the things that he changed in his report, if you look at number 6, was the date of conception for baby Richardson. And he says that the likely conception occurred in July 2016, and that based on that, her physical that she had for school, indicating that she was 134 pounds, now gives us a weight for the date of conception. Would you agree with that?
No, there's no way of knowing what the weight would have been at conception, regardless.
You agree, though, that he changed the conception date from his February 7th report, where he indicated that the likely conception date was around the end of August, and now moved it to July of 2016?
Yes.
Are you aware from the review of the records that Ms. Richardson and the baby's father were not even involved in July of 2016?
No.
If I were to indicate to you that they have both indicated that the relationship occurred over the month of August of 2017, would you accept that as accurate?
Yes.
So do you have any idea why he changed the conception date, or what that change would have been made based upon?
No, not unless he backtracked from information regarding the anthropology information, if it was available at the time.
He continues in this report to indicate that he is certain that we have a 32-week-old baby, or a 32-week-old fetus, on April 26th, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, that is absolutely not what he says.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the purposes of expert testimony, and I sort of told you this a little bit earlier, an attorney is allowed to ask a witness to accept a certain set of facts and to determine whether or not that set of facts changes the expert's opinion. It is your job as the jurors to determine whether or not those facts match up to the facts that have been proven as evidence in the case. So I will overrule the objection. Ms. Kraft, it does make sense to rephrase your question, though.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, you would agree that in his third point, he again references that we have a 32-week fundal height, 32-centimeter fundal height, which would make this a 32-week-old fetus, correct?
Correct.
And that it is his opinion that this is now a 37-week fetus, and that when we then go down to his fourth point, we have, in fact, a 5-centimeter leg and fundal height.
That's what he states, yes.
But this is still based upon that April 26th fundal height measurement done by Dr. Andrew with his hand, correct?
Correct.
And based on a hand measurement at 32 weeks, can we definitively say that on April 26th, baby Richardson was 32 weeks?
No.
Doctor, you, based on your entire examination of this case, all of the records, the reports that were authored by Dr. White, were you able to reach a conclusion as to whether or not there was sufficient evidence to make a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction for baby Richardson?
No.
Were you able to form an opinion?
I have opinion of, I have no idea whether this baby was growth restricted or not, based on the information.
And you were asked to engage in a consultation to make a determination as to whether or not there was sufficient evidence to make a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction, correct?
Correct.
And you were also asked to review everything to determine if there was sufficient evidence to make a diagnosis of stillbirth, correct?
Correct.
And do you believe that you were able to review all of the information pertinent to this case to answer those two questions?
Yes.
Okay. And once you had completed your consultation, did you write a letter containing your assessment and conclusions?
Yes.
And in fact, you have two letters, correct?
Correct.
One, I believe, indicates what your opinion is,
Yes.
and the other one references all of the materials that you reviewed in your consultation on this case.
Yes.
And those are marked, I believe the first one is State's Exhibit 115 for purposes of identification. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the second one, dated April 9th of 2018, is 116 for purposes of identification.
Yes.
Doctor, can you please read the contents of your letter to the jury for State's Exhibit 115?
The whole letter?
Yes, please.
All right, the letter is addressed to Julie A. Kraft, dated March 15, 2018. Dear Ms. Kraft, per your request, I've reviewed the following records, which you sent me regarding State versus Brooks Skylar Richardson. First record is Hilltop OBGYN medical records. Second document is coroner's report. Third document is Dr. Latham's report, the state's anthropologist. Fourth document, sports physical, July of 2016. And the fifth document is the defense expert report. Having had the opportunity to review the aforementioned documents, I conclude the following. 1, Ms. Richardson was seen by Dr. Andrew on 4/26/17, at which time she presented for oral contraceptive pill prescription. Subsequent physical exam demonstrated that she was pregnant with a fundal height of 32 centimeters, suggestive of a gestational age approximating 32 weeks gestation. Fetal cardiac activity was documented with a fetal heart rate of 140 beats per minute, which is within the normal range. Fundal height measurements in centimeters between 18 and 30 weeks gestation has been shown to coincide with weeks of gestation. However, at 32 weeks gestation and greater, fundal height measurements can be inaccurate as the fetus descends lower in the pelvis. The patient was instructed to return to his office in 1 week for an obstetrical sonogram to presumably more accurately date her gestation. Number 2, fundal height measurements are a screening tool for fetal growth abnormalities. However, its principal drawback is imprecision. Investigators have reported that fundal height measurements correctly identify only 40% of small for gestational age or growth-restricted fetuses. Thus, growth-restricted fetuses are both overlooked and overdiagnosed 60% of the time, utilizing fundal height measurement only. Therefore, one cannot conclude that Ms. Richardson's fetus was growth-restricted without being incorrect over half the time. Number 3, Ms. Richardson's height was 5 feet 2 and weight was 134 pounds on an OHSAA pre-participation physical exam performed on July 13, 2016, over 9 months prior to her initial visit to Dr. Andrews' office on the day her pregnancy was diagnosed on 4/26/17. A patient's weight with an eating disorder fluctuates up and down. Although Ms. Richardson weighed 149 pounds on 4/26/17 and was sometime in her 3rd trimester, it is not known what her weight actually was shortly after conception nor any time during her pregnancy until that initial visit on 4/26/17. Therefore, one cannot determine how much weight gain Ms. Richardson experienced during the pregnancy, nor make any assertion regarding her caloric intake and or nutritional status during the course of her pregnancy. Although Ms. Richardson's hemoglobin hematocrit drawn on 4/26/17 was 12.1 grams per deciliter and 36.1% respectively, both within the normal range. If she were truly poorly nourished, she most likely would have been anemic, i.e. iron deficient, which she obviously was not. Number 4, given the lack of accuracy of a fundal height screening measurement, 60% of the time, and the absence of good ultrasound gestational age dating, one cannot hypothetically extrapolate that Ms. Richardson's fetus was growth restricted on the day of delivery. Number 5, the average duration of active labor in first pregnancies approximates 8 hours. The duration of labor is not directly correlated to the size of the fetus. In summary, one cannot conclude, based on review of the aforementioned records, that Ms. Richardson's fetus was growth restricted and or stillborn. If you have any questions regarding my review of the case, please contact me. Signed, myself.
Doctor, in your April 9th letter, were you given additional materials to review as they became available?
I had a second report to review by Dr. John White, dated March 28, 2018.
Carlisle High School records?
Yep, and Carlisle High School record, cover letter dated August 8. Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center records, the cover letter dated September 15, 2017. Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center medical records of Brooke S. Richardson, date of birth 3/9/99, with a cover letter dated August 24.
Ms. Kraft, it's not your intention to have this witness just read these reports, right?
No.
Okay, let's go ahead and get to a question then, please.
All of the records that are listed in this second letter, April 9th, 2018, did you take those into consideration as well when reaching a conclusion in this case, Doctor?
Yes.
Based on your review of everything you had initially and based on all of the information that was supplemented, did any of those new documents or materials or records in any way change the opinion that you indicated you had in the first letter?
No.
Doctor, if the defense had requested that you write your first letter, would it have been the same letter?
Yes.
Based upon your review of the case, the medical evidence, and the defendant's own statements, is it possible in this case to make a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction?
No.
Doctor, based upon your review of this case, the medical evidence, and defendant's own statements, is it possible in this case to make a diagnosis that the defendant's daughter was stillborn?
No.
Your Honor, if I may have a moment.
You may.
Doctor, with regards to both of those questions regarding the diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction and the diagnosis of stillbirth, do you hold those opinions to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Doctor.
Mr. Vickers, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm good, thank you.
And you and I have never talked, have we?
Not to my knowledge, no.
You were paid by the prosecutors to come in here and give your opinion, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us how much you were paid to do all the work and come in here and give your opinion?
So far, I've been paid nothing.
Can you tell us how much you're going to charge for your work and your opinion?
For a court appearance, we charge, as members of our group, we charge $5,000 a day for a court appearance because that's usually what it costs in our practice when we're away from our practice.
What about the 8 hours of the interrogation tapes and preparing your report? Do you charge for that also?
Charge $500 an hour.
And do you have a recollection as to how many hours you put into preparing the report, looking at everything?
Not off the top of my head. My secretary keeps my hours.
And fair enough. I heard when Ms. Kraft was asking you a question about you're testifying as an expert in cases, and she asked you, do you primarily testify for the state or for the defense? And your answer was, you testify for the defense. You remember that?
Correct.
And that's true, isn't it?
Yes.
And when you're testifying for the defense, though, you're talking about civil cases, aren't you?
Correct.
Is this the first criminal case you've ever testified in?
Yes.
Thank you. So, you don't testify for plaintiffs in med-mal cases. You testify for defendants, meaning defendant doctors, in med-mal cases, for the defense.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, you indicated that you know Dr. John White, who will be testifying here next week, correct?
Yes.
And you've come in here today to tell the jury that Dr. White is all wrong, correct?
Pretty much, yes.
And you know Dr. White's reputation in the obstetrics and gynecology community, don't you?
Yes.
And he's very respected, isn't he?
Yes.
And in fact, you're aware that Dr. White was an expert in a case where 2 of your residents, where you were the attending physician, had been sued for malpractice. You're aware of that, aren't you?
No.
Doctor, you familiar with the case of Jazz Gaines versus Tri-Health and Good Samaritan Hospital?
Don't recall, no.
You don't recall?
What year was that?
That's a great question. I don't know if I brought the actual complaint with me. Tri-Health is your group, though, isn't it? Isn't it?
My employer.
It's your employer. I'm sorry, your employer. And you are at times an attending physician, correct?
Yes, we cover resident cases.
I don't have the timestamp copy, Doctor, of the actual complaint. I only have the non-timestamp copy.
All I can state is I know that I've never been in court for a malpractice case myself.
Yeah, I didn't say you were. You were not the one sued. It was the 2 residents where you were the attending physician. Okay. And do you have any recollection whatsoever when you were attending physician and your 2 residents, when 2 of your residents had been sued for malpractice?
No.
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point.
Overruled. Go ahead.
if I were to tell you that Dr. White was chosen to be one of the experts to defend those two residents in that malpractice case, you wouldn't disagree with that, would you?
No.
Dr. White, are you a member of, what is it, ACOG? ACOG?
Yes.
And that stands for American College of,
Obstetricians and gynecologists.
and ACOG produces a bulletin, is that what you call it? A practice bulletin?
Yes.
Is that weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly?
It's whenever they feel that there's a need for a clarification in the guidelines of practice, they publish it. So there's no, doesn't necessarily come out every month.
I got you.
Or there's no
But it just
time,
comes
there's
out
no
when-
timeline.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Just comes out when they feel it's necessary to give physicians, obstetricians, and gynecologists new guidelines or guidelines on how to treat patients, et cetera, right?
Correct.
And obstetricians and gynecologists rely on that, don't they?
Yes.
You rely on it, don't you?
Yes.
Did you write any articles for that, by the way?
No.
Doctor, I'm going to show the jury, if I can have some help. I marked this as Defendant's Exhibit HHHH. You don't need to, I'm just referring for the record. Okay. This is one of those practice bulletins that we were talking about. You can see it on your monitor, is that correct?
Yes.
At the very top, it looks like it was originally published May of 2013, correct?
Correct.
And over on the right that I'm circling, it was reaffirmed 2018, correct?
Correct.
Meaning it's up to date. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Doctor, I'm referring next, and you can see it on your monitor there. I think it's like on maybe the third page of this bulletin. It says clinical considerations and recommendations, correct?
Correct.
And right under that, what I've highlighted, could you read that for me, please?
From the top.
No, what I highlighted, where it starts with fundal height measurements.
Okay. Fundal height measurements should be performed at each prenatal care visit after 24 weeks of gestation. A discrepancy between weeks of gestational age and fundal height measurement of greater than 3 centimeters have been proposed for identifying a fetus that may be growth restricted.
So, as I understand that, they're suggesting to all the obstetricians should be using the fundal height, and if they think that there is a 3 centimeter lag, then they need to check further, don't they?
Yes.
Thank you. The next paragraph that I highlighted, could you read that for us, please? A little bit more slowly so that the jury can understand what you're reading.
Although other approaches to fetal growth restriction screening have been studied, including universal third trimester ultrasonography, uterine artery and Doppler velocimetry, and measurement of analytes such as pregnancy-associated plasma protein A, there is no evidence that these fetal growth restriction screening methods improve outcomes.
So what are they saying there, doctor? Are they saying fundal height is as good as these other things that you had just mentioned or you just read?
No, what it's saying is that these additional methods don't necessarily improve outcomes. It
Gotcha.
says nothing about establishing the diagnosis of IUGR.
This. Doctor, I'm going to show you what is on page 2. Move it this way for me. Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. Yeah, that's good. The very bottom of that, perinatal morbidity, mortality, morbidity. Can you read that for us, please?
The bottom line that's highlighted?
It's at the bottom. Right here.
Okay. Fetal growth restriction increases the risk of intrauterine demise, neonatal morbidity, and neonatal death.
Okay. Now, could you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that means, the intrauterine demise? What's that mean?
Yes, intrauterine demise is where the baby succumbs in utero, in other words, an intrauterine death. Neonatal morbidity is where, first off, a neonate is defined as a newborn within the first 30 days of life. So if you have a baby that's fetal growth restricted, there's an increased risk of complications in the neonatal period. For example, inability to control their temperature, failure to feed, infections, because they're smaller babies, and of course then neonatal death. So they're at higher risk for neonatal death.
Thank you very much. Now, going up the page,
Mr. Rickers, Dr. Brady, it might just be me, or it might just be the lateness of the week, but I'm having trouble hearing a little bit, so if everybody could elevate your voices and maybe move in the direction of the microphone, that might help.
I'm sorry, I've got this drawer out here. I apologize. Can you all hear me? Sorry. Doctor, if you could refer, please, to what's now on your screen, and it's that box. Could you read that at the top? What's that first headline?
The headline says, Etiology of Fetal Growth Restriction.
And what does that mean, etiology?
Means potential causes of fetal growth restriction.
And at the very bottom that I highlighted, what does that say?
It says placental disorders and umbilical cord abnormalities.
Thank you. We're done with that. Doctor is I don't know if it's called a journal, but obstetrics and gynecology, and I understand you've written articles for that.
Yes,
Does that come out monthly, yearly, what?
monthly.
And doctor, I read in there, and I apologize, I don't have the date, but let me put it here. Well, I'll read it to you. This is in the discussion part. It says fetal growth restriction is associated with increased perinatal morbidity and mortality. The rate of stillbirth is double that in the general population when birth weight is 15 to 25% below normal. You agree with that?
Yes,
In fact, you co-authored this.
yes.
Doctor, when in your practice, and hopefully in every obstetrician's and gynecologist's practice, keeping an accurate record, the medical chart, which is the medical records of a patient, correct?
Correct.
Keeping an accurate record is very important, is it not?
Yes.
And so there's been a lot of debate here about whether Dr. Andrew actually put in his chart 32 weeks that he measured with the fundal height at 32 centimeters. If he put it in the chart, would you accept that as fairly accurate, at least as to what he wrote in that chart?
Yes, I had no reason not to believe it.
Thank you. Doctor, Ms. Kraft was talking about the information that you were provided, and that was provided by the prosecution, correct?
Yes.
And I don't know if you mentioned it, but an important piece of information I think that she may not have shared with you, or not intentionally, by the way, is the police report of Detective Carter, where Detective Carter reports that she and Detective Fain interviewed Trey Johnson, who was the father of this child. Did you see that?
No.
I'm going to show you part of that report. There, at the top there, that's highlighted, it says that Lieutenant Fain and I, meaning Randy Carter there, Detective Carter, went to Trey's house, and Trey's mother answered the door. Then starting at the bottom, it says, he stated that they talked and did stuff for a week in late July or the first week of August. And then the next week, she suddenly blocked him on all social media, and he has not spoken to her since. That's an important data point, isn't it? This is the father.
Right.
This is a father who said, when he was interviewed by the detectives, that he only messed around with her for 2 weeks, into July, beginning of August. That's what it says.
That's what it says. Yes.
That's an important fact to know, isn't it? When it comes,
Assuming it's fact, yes.
yeah, and it's important because when Skylar Richardson went to see Dr. Andrews on April 26, she was maybe, 38 weeks pregnant? 39 weeks or 40 weeks. On April 26. Does that make sense? Can you calculate it in your head from, I'm not being facetious, I'm talking about from, let's use the latest date, the first week in August, which ended August 5th, Saturday, August 5th. So calculating from that date, which would be the latest possible date of conception, to April 26th, do you agree that when Skylar went to see Dr. Andrew for the very first time and she learns that she's pregnant, she was 39 weeks pregnant? You agree with that?
Assuming he's a father.
Yeah, we are. I can allay your fears. He is the father. That has been established. So, 39 weeks on April 26. You have a fundal height. Dr. Andrews' fundal height is 32 weeks, correct? That's from the records.
Correct.
So, she's 39 weeks. That's a 7-week lag, isn't it?
According to the measurement, yes.
Wouldn't it have been helpful if you had that data point, Dr. Brady? That would have been very helpful in your opinion today, right?
Possibly, yes.
Just a couple more questions, famous last words of a lawyer. You familiar with the Reed method?
I'm sorry, the what method?
Reed. It's an interrogation technique. Are you familiar with that?
No.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Kraft, redirect.
Your Honor, if I may have one moment.
You may.
Dr. Brady, Mr. Ritker showed you a few lines from 2 articles, just lines. He didn't give you the whole article to read, correct?
Correct.
And the articles where he took those lines from, those are articles that already assume you've been diagnosed with intrauterine growth restriction, correct?
Yes.
So when he asks you if IUGR increases the risk of intrauterine demise, that's correct, right?
Correct.
I mean, that's a no-brainer.
Correct.
It doesn't mean that if you have intrauterine growth restriction, you have a stillborn child. It just means that if you have intrauterine growth restriction, then the risk of demise could increase.
Correct.
He also asked you if umbilical cord abnormalities result in IUGR, correct?
Correct.
Based on the information we have in this case, is there anything to diagnose an umbilical cord abnormality?
No.
You would agree that the defendant has given different statements in her interviews about whether the umbilical cord was attached or not.
Yes.
And I don't want to keep rehashing stuff, but if a baby drops out of the female body and there's nothing there to catch that baby, can the weight
Objection, Your
of the
Honor.
baby
That was-
Overruled.
sever the cord?
Yes.
Very early in your testimony, we talked about babies that are intrauterine growth restricted, premature, or just constitutionally small. What is a constitutionally small baby, doctor?
Judge, may we approach?
The objection is sustained.
Thank you.
In this case, doctor, would you agree that the mother of baby Richardson, Brooke Richardson, is a very small statured female? Your Honor, can we ask that the defendant stand up for a moment?
Sure.
I would say thin-bodied. I'm not sure about height, but just, to me, stature is height.
Okay.
You can sit down, Ms. Richardson, thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense is arguing that we now have a 7-week lag, according to a screening fundal height measurement, correct?
Correct.
Fundal height measurement, is it anything more than a screening tool?
No.
Would you disagree with Dr. Andrew when he said that his 32-centimeter measurement was not definitive and could be off by 3 to 4 weeks?
Yes.
You would agree or disagree with him?
Agree.
Agree. So if he's measuring 32 weeks, if it's not definitive and can be off by 3 to 4, which is why I assume again,
Object, Your Honor. That was never the testimony.
Overruled.
Never.
Overruled.
if that fundal height measurement can be off by that much, I assume that's why it's nothing more than a screening tool, correct?
Correct.
And in this case, we have a baby that, as documented by Dr. Andrew, is already in cephalic presentation, correct?
Yes.
So on April 26th, she could have been very easily 35 to 36 weeks pregnant.
Correct.
If she had a baby 1.5 weeks later, she's now up to 37.5 weeks pregnant, perhaps. Maybe 38.5 weeks pregnant, perhaps. Because again, we're making all of these determinations off of a screening tool, correct?
Correct.
If we now have a 38.5 week baby, is that diagnostic of intrauterine growth restriction?
No.
Is that diagnostic of stillbirth?
No.
Do we have any evidence to support that we definitively have a lag in this baby's growth?
No.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Rickers, B. Cross?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Doctor, I apologize if I misstated my question that Ms. Kraft pointed out to you when she stood back up here on redirect. I thought, and obviously I probably didn't do this, but the abnormality of an umbilical cord is a symptom of IUGR, isn't it?
No.
It can be, though, can it not?
I suppose it can, yes.
Well, we just read in the ACOG thing about placental disruption and umbilical cord problems as being a problem of IUGR, right?
Correct.
So it could be a symptom of IUGR, couldn't it?
Could be a symptom and or a cause.
I didn't hear that.
And or a cause.
Or cause. Yeah, thanks. I have no further questions. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor. You can step down. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are going to go ahead and end for the day. By nature, I'm not a very creative person, so it's difficult for me to keep finding ways to tell you the same instructions over and over again in new and different ways. I have to remind you again of essentially the same things that we have talked about. Now, I want to be serious about this one point, though, in that the longer that you are away from me, the more likely you are to forget the things that I am telling you. It is very important, because we're not going to see each other again until Monday. It is very important that you are not to do any research about this case. You are not to view any media reports. If you see a report come on television, flip it off. If you see something on your internet feed or see a newspaper, just go ahead and brush it aside. You might have people who you're going to come into contact with who are going to want to talk to you about this case, whether they know that you are a part of it or not. You have to tell them that you cannot talk about the case, do not discuss the matters with the people at home, stay away from the Eagle Ridge address in Carlisle, and do not begin to form an opinion how this case should be decided. The farther we get into the evidence, the more that you might start to think that you have enough to start thinking about how this case should come out. You don't. So when we start back up with the evidence on Monday, we'll do the same thing that we did today. Let's plan on being here at 8:45 with the idea of being here, of starting at 9 o'clock.
Before you release the jury, Judge?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you can stretch out if you want. One last point, ladies and gentlemen, and I don't even know that this is a problem, but I like to talk about problems before they become problems, is the evidence that you are going to consider comes from this side of the courtroom. The witness stand, what's on the screen. What the lawyers say is not evidence. What people in the gallery say or how they respond to the evidence is also not evidence. So because we are a bit mushed up, you might be able to hear, I don't know if you can, overhear conversations about what goes on in the gallery, people talking about the case. I don't think that's probably the case, but if you do, you need to disregard whatever conversation you might hear on that side, focus on what happens on this side. All right, that's all. Mr. Mullins, you can take the jury out. We are on the record outside the presence of the jury. Mr. Rickers, do you want to make a record of the sidebar or not?
I think I do, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Just out of safety precautions. I don't know if you call it an objection, but I'd like the record to reflect that behind the prosecutor's table are, I think, 4 or 5 employees directly behind the prosecutor. I don't know. Recognize some of these ladies. Two for the prosecutor's office. I don't know if the other people are part of court personnel or what. But I noticed that they were talking while proceedings were going on. And my only concern, and I'm not saying that this is true, but my only concern is that they may be talking about the facts of this case or their opinions about this case, and they're no further than 5 feet away from the juror in the corner there. And I'm concerned that if they are talking about their opinions about this case or anything like that, that it could taint the jury. That's all I'm saying. And I don't know what you guys know. I don't know.
Ms. Kraft, any response from the state?
No, Your Honor.
All right. With respect to the conduct of folks in the gallery, I don't know that this has been a problem. I haven't noticed that it's been a problem. If there is any conversation that goes on in the gallery, you keep your voices low. If I discover that this is happening or I have any reason to believe that this is happening, you will be asked to leave and not permitted to return. One other thing with regard to the evidence while we're on the subject, if you're here watching, then the jury is not interested in your reactions to the testimony and what's going on. So if I find your reactions to be distracting to me, potentially distracting to the jury, the same thing will happen. You will be asked to leave and you will not return. All right, we'll see everybody 8:45 on Monday. Let's reconvene in about 10 minutes in Judge Teep's jury room. I think I will get that right eventually. And we'll just talk about some housekeeping matters before we leave for the weekend. Anything else from the state? Anything else from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right, we're in recess.